And hello to you, and welcome to the Richard Nichols Podcast, the personal development podcast series that's here to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to be the best you can be. I'm psychotherapist Richard Nichols, and today's is a bonus episode. It's an interview with Michelle Thomas. And if you're ready, we'll start the show. Me again. Middle of the month bonus episode time, folks. And this month, it is a lovely chat with an equally lovely Michelle Thomas. Michelle is an author and podcaster, has written for The Guardian, The Independent, Stylist, Standard Issue, the list goes on. And on top of that, she also wrote a book about her experience of depression, as well as interviewing other people for it as well. In this episode, we talk about all sorts. Why it seems that some therapists don't seem to know what they're doing, and continuing to see them as a client might do more harm than good. Why journaling does more good than harm, and why it's okay to hallucinate. No trigger warnings needed, although I have needed to mark the episode as explicit for the first time in 10 years, or longer than 10 years, because there is some very brief effing and jeffing, but to be honest, that was always going to be inescapable, and I knew that when I invited her on. You'll hear why within the first 2 minutes of it starting. So I shall press play, and we can chat again later at the end. See you later. Hello, Michelle. How are you today?
Hello, Richard. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm super. It's a damp January morning here in the Midlands. You're in... Where are you, Bristol?
I'm in Bristol, yeah. So I'm really lucky. I've got like a little spare room in my flat, and I call it my office. And I've got the curtains closed because that's kind of to make the sound better on a podcast. You're supposed to be surrounded by soft furnishings. So I just haven't looked outside yet, and I just refuse. I'm just still in my sort of post-bed cocoon. So yeah, we're all good.
Good stuff. Now, you wrote a book which... In mentioning it, I'm going to have to tick the box on my Is This Podcast Episode Explicit?
Yeah, you are.
Because your book title... In fact, I don't think the public have ever heard me swear. I've only ever... I said the F word on a patron-only podcast when I was reading out...
Richard.
I was reading a poem. The Philip Larkin This Be the Verse poem. The title of your book, I'll let you describe it.
So the book is called My Shit Therapist and Other Mental Health Stories. And yeah, you're not the first therapist to get in touch with me to go, should we talk about that? It's interesting.
Did it cross my mind when I first saw that book title when it came out? Did I think, oh no, this is just going to be about how shit therapists are? I think it might have done. I think it might have not put my back up because I'm not the sort of character to get my back put up. But I did think, somebody's had a bad experience with a therapist and they're going to slag off everything to do with talk therapy. And that's not the case. That is not what the book is quite about, is it?
No, not at all, in fact. So it's called My Shit Therapist because my first experience with a therapist was terrible. And that's because my expectations were way too high. So it's a combination of having very, very, very high expectations and feeling very, very, very low and being in crisis. So I was in the middle of a massive depressive episode. Like I'd had to quit my job. I couldn't really leave my flat. I just cried and cried and cried many, many, many hours a day for days and days at a time. It was very, very tedious.
I think a lot of people don't realise just unless they experience depression, exactly what it is and how it feels. And there was something you described. You described an experience of desperately needing a drink because you were thirsty, but you just did not have the energy to leave your bed and go and get it. And that is how depression feels to a lot of people. And unless somebody's gone through that, they don't really understand that. They can see somebody else going through it and think, just go and get a drink. I don't understand what's the matter. You're thirsty, go and get a drink. My depression is stopping me from doing something that on the most basic of levels is a human need. And that's terribly sad.
Yeah. It was very, very frightening as well. And it was about 7 years ago now. So this is before the conversations about mental illness and mental health. This is a really cynical way of putting it, but hit the zeitgeist. This is before Matt Haig, it's before Ruby Wax, it's before Bryony Gordon, it's before, we had these massive nationwide It's Good to Talk campaigns. And it was terrifying. I thought I would never, ever get well again. And that's important because I was finally at a point where I could not avoid accepting the fact that I had a mental illness. And then I couldn't avoid having to seek help. First of all, through my GP, who put me in touch with this counselling service, which is where I had that experience. And then I started taking antidepressants. And then I got the appointment. And then I had to leave my flat and get on a train to an unfamiliar part of London. And I had to make my way to this office. And I was sat in the waiting room. And then I was taken into this little nondescript side room where this woman, where I had space to talk and I felt safe for the first time. And I talked and talked and I allowed all of this poison to come out of me. And I just offloaded all of my fears. I described the panic attacks that I had where I felt like I was going to die. I described my terrible fear that something bad was going to happen to the man I loved. I voiced my anxiety and my depression in a way that I never had before. And it was then, when I was at my most vulnerable, that she said, well, the next time you think you're going to have a panic attack, just have a cup of tea and think about something else. Because, there are people who are far worse off than you.
As a therapist...
20 quid that cost me.
That's a bargain. Well, having said that, you just paid to be... It's not... she didn't mean to insult you, but she did. She absolutely did. And whenever somebody says that, clients will say that to me sometimes. They will say, I know there are people worse off than me. I shouldn't feel like this. Well, that means that in a planet of over 7 billion people, there's only one person that's allowed to be sad, because everybody else has it better than them. And I don't know who that person is. And I've often thought about who that person is. And I do think, my God, that person exists, actually. There is somebody on this planet who is, they're having it worse. That does not mean they are the only person that is allowed to have depression or to feel that they don't belong or to feel scared if the neurons of the brain are firing in a particular way that says, I'm terrified. So although the therapist in me tries not to, after 20 years of being a therapist, you learn not to judge people.
Go on, Richard, judge her. Go on.
I can't.
Go on. Oh. Drag her.
It's just so against me. It just, I think there's probably only, even people like Donald Trump, I look at from a psychotherapist perspective and go, the man's unwell. He needs help. He's deep down, there is such pain. Somebody help this man. There is another voice in my head that says, just slap the man. But as for the therapist that doesn't know how to talk to a patient, some therapists do need extra training, and they do need, sadly, they do need pulling up on it. They do need a client to go, that was really unhelpful. And you can only do that once you've already got a great relationship with your therapist. Or
you can only do that when you're
not depressed,
mentally robust, and when you're not depressed. Yeah, and this is an issue with. We talk about mental health in terms of binary, in terms of illness or wellness, and in terms of wellness or crisis. And it's kind of, I was terribly ill you're either terribly, terribly suicidally ill, or everything's fine and you're running ultramarathons again and everything's brilliant. When actually that most of us exist in the in-between. You're managing in the middle, the madmen, as it were. And also, if you only seek help when you're in crisis, you're not able to do the work of getting better when you're in crisis. You just need to recover on your own. So when your expectations are very, very high, if your expectations are very, very high, or if your therapist only very slightly underdelivers or delivers something that's utterly devastating, it's crippling because you can't function, and you can't fight back, and you can't rationalize in the same way. So, for example, if today I went to a therapist's office and they said that to me, I would laugh at them and then I would leave. And I'd probably make a complaint, but that wouldn't impact me. I knew that I would know that wouldn't have an effect on me. But when you're ill and you're vulnerable and you've sought help, and the person who you've invested so much hope in, the person you've invested too much in because you believe that therapy is this magic bullet, it's devastating. And that's why I named the book My Shit Therapist, because we need to talk about the fact that actually therapy doesn't work for everyone, and that's okay. Or, like you say, people need different kinds of therapy. So if it doesn't work straight away the first time for you, that's fine. There are other options for you, except at the moment there really aren't in this country, because
there is and there isn't. We have many thousands of counsellors and psychotherapists in the UK registered with either the BACP or the UKCP. There are thousands, tens of thousands. How to choose one is an absolute minefield. And you can Google Wandsworth psychotherapy or Camden counselling or whatever and just see what comes up on the first page of Google. The chances are that the first people that appears, that's not going to be the right therapist for you. What are the chances of that? Out of the thousands of people in the country, that the one that was right for you was right there on the first page of Google. And that is presuming then that you've got the finances in place to pay privately. What if you go to your GP and say, I'm really unwell, I don't know what to do? And then we go, right, okay, we need to send you to an agency where there are some counsellors. That system isn't working quite so well at the minute. There's not enough money being given to those places. And so I do wonder if the less financial help they get, the cheaper it needs to be, and to make it more affordable, the sort of therapy that somebody provides is going to be the easiest kind, one that doesn't burden the therapist too much. So it's one that really involves kind of not really listening to your patient, which is not particularly good therapy. We don't know. There is a problem.
Yeah.
And frustratingly, the best way of solving it, when it comes to face-to-face therapy anyway, is to go privately. It really is. But like we said, not everybody can afford that. And that's why a lot of therapists also do pro bono work. They do see people for free. Not everybody, obviously, because we've all got a roof over our head. And also, there needs to be, I think, I often say, I would do my job for free if I could. Then there's a voice in the back of my head that says, don't do that, Richard. Your patients won't get better. And there is some truth in that there is some value when somebody exchanges, whether it's £10 or £100, they go, I'm paying for something. If there is value to it, then they're more likely to get better. They're more likely to do their homework, for example, if they get set any. More likely to value the relationship better because they paid for it. Whereas on the NHS, everything is free as far as free is concerned. That there's less value to some of the things that are provided. So that there are big problems, and how we solve them is too big for one guy to try and figure out. It really, really is.
I mean, what that means is the people who need care the most and can't afford it, aren't being treated and aren't receiving the help that they need. And that does just come down to whether or not they can afford it.
Yep.
And that's wrong. I know it's really simplistic. I just want everyone to get the therapy and the help that they need for free on the NHS.
Yep.
I just want that to work.
I've been saying it for 20 years that those that need the help the most are those that can't afford it. It's this sort of trampoline-y, bouncy phrase that I've been saying to everybody forever. And that's why I encourage therapists to offer discounted rates in certain cases, to see a few people each week, either for free or for a donation or whatever, because people need help. Now,
yeah, it has to be a structural thing. It can't be down to individual therapists, because that it's not fair on them to make a decision that impacts them and their household and their livelihood. It's a conflict of interest. It doesn't matter, the most altruistic person in the world. If there's a conflict of interest between their own livelihood and the wellness of the people around them, or the wellness of other people in their community, that shouldn't be up to them. They shouldn't have that pressure on them, because that will impact the way that they work. It needs to be a structural, sweeping, general, broad, universal basic income, universal basic therapy. It'll be great. But that's my socialist utopia idea.
Oh, I 100% agree. I absolutely agree. And there's very little good that has come out of COVID-19. But this is the most socialist the Conservative government has ever been. In places. There are other times where I'm not going to get into into politics.
Yeah, I think
it'll make me angry.
Anyway. So just on choosing a therapist, I genuinely got to the point where I thought about choosing a therapist based on Google images. I just looked at them, and there was a woman with a brilliant, severe black bob haircut, like a proper no nonsense, no choppy layers, no textures, no colours. It was just like you could set your watch by it. And I thought, yeah, she's the one. She'll sort me out. I didn't see her in the end. So maybe she would have been the one. Who knows?
First impressions count.
Yeah. So on my podcast, My Shit Therapist, I spoke to the brilliant writer Sian Harris.
I know Sian.
Do you?
Yeah, well, we've chatted. We're Twitter friends.
She's amazing. I love her. And she was talking about how she said, right, I need to sort this out now. I need to choose a therapist. And she set aside a week in her calendar just to ring people, to speak to them for 10 minutes, to have like the initial consultation, to have an initial appointment with them. And I think she said she spoke to about 8 or 10 people just to do the first, just to help her choose exactly the kind of therapy that she wants. And I think she came to seeing in the end about 3 different people, which was something like a CBT person, an EMDR person, which is the eye movement one, and I think and a psychotherapist. And she says, she had the time and she had the resources to do that, and it's the best thing that she could have done. And that's what everyone needs. They need that kind of tailored, personalised care.
And I think this is when other people might need to step in, because if somebody is in the depths of their depression, they might not be able to do that.
Yeah, no, you can't do. Like, if you're in bed and you can't move enough to get a glass of water, this is another thing about, not waiting until you're in crisis to get help. If you're in crisis, you're not in a position where you can talk to one person, let alone ring around and have the self-assurance and the confidence to say, this isn't going to work, so I'm not gonna pay you for another session, and I'm just gonna go to the next person.
Sian did exactly what you're supposed to do. And if the public know that that's what you're supposed to do, then we'll slowly try and make the world a better place. But what we need, like you say, is to nip things in the bud. That we don't wait until we're in crisis before we put our hands in the air and go, something's wrong. When did you notice that things weren't quite right?
So I was working, at the time I was working a very high pressure job. I was a producer for a comedy company, for an agency. And I was working very, very long hours for very, very, very low pay. And there was an expectation that you would always go above and beyond and demonstrate your commitment. And that means working evenings, weekends, basically your time isn't your own. And there was a succession of things leading up to that point. So over about 6 months, there were a few massive life events. So my dad had a stroke. He recovered almost immediately. It was very minor, but my dad never gets ill. So it really shook us up as a family. And then I started this new job, and then I moved in with my then boyfriend. And, you know, moving house in itself is the most stressful thing that you could do. But and then moving in with a partner for the first time added another layer of stress and anxiety onto that. So each of these, they're all big life changes, which are stressful. They're not, it doesn't mean they're bad, but it does mean that they come with a particular level of stress. And they happened one after the other every couple of weeks for about 6 months. And I started to get really, really tired and really tearful, and I'd cry at work. And it was the kind of environment where I was working with some of my closest friends. We're still close, we're still best friends to this day. So it was the kind of place where I could just go, I'm really weepy, I'm really tired. I just need a couple of weeks. I just need a break. I just need the weekend. I just need a holiday. And then it got to Christmas, and I thought, right, I've got 2 weeks off. That'll sort me out. And there was a 2-week Christmas break, and then I went back to work, and 3 days later, I had a breakdown. There's no other way of saying it. And I just left work in the middle of the day, and I had a secret job interview for a writing job for a theatre company. So I went to that, and then meant to go back to work, but then I just went home and started crying and didn't stop for about 3 days. So it's this very, very insidious, slow burning thing over months and months and months. And then it happens all at once. And then my body made me stop. And
I think that's what emotions are for. Our feelings we call them feelings because they're in our body. We feel those sensations in our stomach, in our heart. You know, we feel it in our muscles. We feel our feelings. They're there to tell us my needs are not being met, my expectations are not being met, or whatever it is. Whatever it is, something's wrong. Listen to me. And your body's trying to tell you something's wrong. Listen to me. And we don't. For the last goodness knows how many thousands of years, probably, we just accept them, that it's part of being human. Emotions are part of being human. And yes, they are, but they're there for a purpose. They're there for a reason. And we do need to take action on that. Even if that action is just, oh, I get why I feel that way. That makes sense. That might be all we need to do for some emotions. But sometimes if we're feeling lonely, then we need to acknowledge that, I'm feeling lonely. I am both alone and lonely today. I need to reach out to somebody. It's telling us to do something. And if we don't take action early enough, then the brain begins to hardwire in those feelings. And they're there for no reason sometimes. We could be with loads of people, and we could be with all the people there that we love, but we still feel lonely because the brain has got so used to it that it's just constantly sending signals to the body that says this is how you're supposed to feel. And that's not a good habit. That might take a few weeks of repetition to take place. It might take a few months of repetition. But if you keep repeating the same feelings I'm using loneliness just as an example, but it could be anything. Certainly being overwhelmed. If you're overwhelmed on a daily basis for a few months, even when you're no longer overwhelmed, your body still thinks you're supposed to be. So it keeps creating all these feelings. And we do need to notice that, to examine that, to pick it apart and go, oh, I don't need to feel this way. And yeah, maybe when you feel that coming on, are we supposed to just have a cup of tea and then try and think about something else? Maybe 1 in 100 that's going to help, but 99 out of 100, no. There's clearly more going on here. Was there more going on? Was there more to all your overwhelmed than just the amount of work?
I mean, like I say, it was all of those big life changes.
But it was a current thing. It wasn't a lifelong thing.
I've certainly...
So there weren't signs as a teenager, for example. A lot of people, when they talk to me about how the depression as an adult manifests, they go, well, actually, I've always been a bit of a worrier. Or actually, as a kid, I was very, very shy, or something similar. Did you find that there were some reasons other than the house move and the boyfriend and blah, 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 blah?
Not reasons as such, but when I examined it, I certainly had previous. I just hadn't known that there was a name for anxiety and for depression. So I was 27 when I had my big emotional breakdown. When I was 15, I was watching Blue Peter. We weren't really a Blue Peter house, but it was on in the background.
I'm not going to judge.
And Katie Hill Katie Hill, she started talking about autism. And she said people with autism are very intelligent, but they can find it quite difficult to make friends. And the light just went off in my head and I went, that's it, I'm autistic. It was very, very top line. It was very, very simplistic. And I'm sure in the year 2000, 20 years ago, I'm sure they talked about autism in a very different way than we would talk about autism today. But at that time, that was all I needed. And the next day, I secretly went to see my GP in my hometown without my parents knowing. And I sat down and I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I think I'm autistic, which I now understand isn't really, isn't something that we'd associate with the condition for the most part. And he didn't laugh at me. He didn't tell me off for wasting his time. He didn't dismiss me. He said, okay, why do you think that? And it all came out. How isolated I felt, how I felt like everyone else had a code or rules that they were following that I didn't understand, how I felt on the outside of everything, and how lonely and isolated I felt. And he said, okay. Have you ever read The Catcher in the Rye?
J.D. Salinger.
And he took his prescription pad and he wrote down J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, and he slid it over to me and he said, read that, it'll make you feel normal. And while broadly speaking, we would not recommend, prescribing literature to treat mental illness or depression. It's
a dark book as well.
It's very, very dark. And also it's not something that I was a 15-year-old girl in rural North Wales. Holden Caulfield is a 15-year-old boy in New York who steals his dad's credit card to
go and see a prostitute. Yeah.
And where would I even find a sex worker in rural North Wales? I'd have to go to Wrexham or Chester, which was a 2-hour bus drive away, and it just wasn't practical.
Or legal.
Yeah. However, he didn't tell my parents. He didn't put me on antidepressants. I'm on them now, but I don't think it would have been the right choice at the time. And like I say, he just listened to me, and he validated that, and he offered me a way to imagine a world outside of the small town that I lived in. And I'm so grateful to him for that to this day.
Wow.
So, I've had blips of certainly anxiety. So, for example, another way my anxiety manifested, when I was 17, my lovely dad bought me my first car before I passed my test, and he said, that'll give you incentive. You'll pass your test. And
puts pressure on as well, though.
Yes, but I must have had hundreds of hours of lessons, and I could drive very competently, but when it came to taking the test, I would just fall apart. And I kept going back. I would, the same day, I would book my next test and then book the next one and book the next one. I think
you are stubborn.
Very, very stubborn. But also it's that thing of not listening to myself and to my body and to my mind, and not acknowledging this is something that's stressing you out and making you anxious. Just take a break from it. And I think I honestly lost count at test number 8. So I think it's between 8 and 10 driving tests that I failed. And that was anxiety. I can look back at that now and go, okay, that is a perfect manifestation of generalized anxiety disorder. And it's that fear of being observed and
judged.
But at the time, I just didn't see it. I just thought this is just what people do. This is just what people have to do, and everyone else can do it, and why can't I do it? And just not being able to give myself a break.
By the sound of things, this is what 15-year-olds need to hear. And I know there's a lot more that goes on in schools now compared to what there was back in 2000. But there probably still needs to be a bit more. Or does there? Like you say, it's part of the zeitgeist now. Like you say, Matt Haig, Bryony Gordon, Ruby Wax, they're not the 15-year-olds demographic.
Probably wouldn't be the 15-year-olds choice now.
Although Matt Haig has written some children's stuff, which are great, by the way. Hello, Matt. If you're listening, he doesn't listen to the podcast. I know that because
you checked.
We did speak once, and he didn't even. We'd been chatting about something else, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know you did a podcast." I've been doing it for 10 years, but I'll let him off because I love him. Children are getting, and teenagers are getting, a bit more help and advice. They are beginning to normalise that we aren't all super confident, able to embrace our emotions and anxieties with nothing but excitement. They are beginning to get it, but there's still some work to be done, I think. Katie Hill became a therapist, I think, actually. I think she trained, I'm sure. I didn't dream that. I'm pretty sure she trained as either a counsellor or a life coach or something like that. I'm sure that's what she's doing now.
Oh, my goodness.
Or back then she must have known these are my interests. This is where I want to go with this. And even on Blue Peter, she's talking about it. It's great.
Yeah.
And it did help you, not in the way that you thought it was going to, but it set you on some sort of path.
It just gave me an awareness that. So that trip to the GP gave me an awareness that, I came away from it and I read that book, and it just gave me an awareness that there is a bigger world out there than, the small town that I was living in at the time. And I think the Blue Peter episode about autism gave me an awareness, however ill-informed, gave me an awareness that there are different people have different thought processes, and that it's not a bad thing or a wrong thing. It just is. What I wish I'd had more awareness of was that there is feeling anxious and there is pathological anxiety disorders. And I think what I wish we'd been able to talk about a bit more was the distinction between feeling sad and feeling depressed. And I think the thing is being able to recognise when you're having a disproportional response to something.
Like an allergic reaction.
Yeah.
And I love that, forgive the alliteration and rhyming, but I love your allergy analogy.
Thank you.
Tell my listeners about that, because I think that's fabulous.
Thank you. Do you know, I've got a copy of the book. Shall I read it quickly?
Yeah, please, because it was a wonderful chapter. It was at the beginning, I think, wasn't it?
It's at the beginning, yeah. It's all downhill from there. Not really. Do buy the book. So this was an analogy that I wrote a couple of years ago, and I'm really pleased with it, and it seems to have resonated with a lot of readers. Having depression doesn't mean I'm always depressed, in the same way that being allergic to bee stings doesn't mean a person is in constant anaphylactic shock. It's only when they get stung that it's a problem. Like a person who is prone to depression, a person with a bee sting allergy can get stung at any time. Their allergy is not dependent on their life circumstances. They could win the lottery, have the body of a South Korean athlete, and attend weekly murder mystery nights with Ruth Jones and Charlotte Church, and they'd still be allergic to bee stings. Their allergy isn't negated by terrible world events or the fact that there are many people worse off than them, and it's profoundly unhelpful to suggest that it is. Being allergic to bee stings doesn't make you a bad friend, bad partner, or bad employee. It isn't indulgent or selfish, it's a chemical anomaly. If an allergic person is stung by a bee, it's important they don't feel afraid or ashamed to get help. Treatments that may relieve the effects of a bee sting for a person who is not allergic to them, such as vinegar or spit on a dock leaf, are not effective to a person who is allergic to bee stings. Those allergic people need an EpiPen, and in some cases, professional medical attention. You can't snap out of an allergy, and a positive mental attitude, although helpful, is not an antidote. A person who is allergic to bee stings may encounter a bee and not get stung. For example, if a friend or colleague with the allergy fears they are at risk, they might say to you, "Hi, I'm allergic to bee stings and there's a bee in my office. I'm going to close the window to prevent more bees coming in. I would also like to remove this enormous bouquet of flowers from my desk." And then you could say, "Sure thing, I'll put the bouquet in my office instead." If that person hasn't been stung for a while, that doesn't mean that they're no longer allergic. Though they may take every precaution, no one is guaranteed lifelong bee sting evasion. However, no one should live in fear of their body's response to a chemical imbalance. By encouraging others to talk openly about their allergies and educating others about what to do if they encounter someone having an allergic reaction, we can make our gardens safer for everyone, and we can all enjoy some time in the sun.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
I can see because it makes so much sense as well, and I can see why people take to that. Do you get a lot of messages from people saying thank you about that?
I do, yeah. It's really nice. It's really lovely, yeah. I would also get some, and I can see both sides of this. There are people who would say that depression and mental illness is not anything like an allergy, because an allergy is a visceral physical response, and the response is something that can be measured. You know, it shows up in your skin, it shows up in your bloodstream, it shows up on different physiological tests. A response to an allergy is a physiological fact in a way that is and it's a measurable thing. It's measurable in its severity in the way that a mental illness isn't.
Well, yes and no. I can understand why people would think that, but things like personality disorders, complex trauma. If somebody has what we used to call borderline personality disorder, or nowadays we tend to refer it as emotionally unstable personality disorder, their brain is different because of their experiences they had as a child. When their brain was soft and pliable and was developing, it developed in a different way to somebody that had a safer upbringing. And those come out in their emotional reactivity for the rest of their life. And sadly, it's probably never going to go away because it's hardwired in, genuinely hardwired in. All you can do is hardwire in something else and hope that neurological signal is strong enough to override the old one. But that old one is always going to be there. You can't forget how to ride a bike. You can learn to ride a different type of bike, but all that means is you now know how to ride two different types of bike. You still have the old skill there. A lot of people don't realise that. that their problems might well be lifelong, because it sounds hopeless. But what is hopeful is that you can learn how to manage the fact that this is who I am. But I get why people would be both in love with your allergy analogy and almost maybe some people would be belittled by it, to go, this is not the same at all.
Yeah, I think there are questions to be asked about what we pathologise and what we say can be treated chemically.
Chatting to somebody involved in mental health pharmaceuticals very recently, went out on one of my last podcast episodes was an interview with him, actually. We were talking about the placebo effect and how a placebo will work a little better for mental health problems than it will for physical health problems. When you play around with the why, what you find is that, of course, no matter which group you're in, because even it's a double-blind study, even the doctors don't know whether somebody's on the real antidepressant or not. They all go through the same process, which is going somewhere, sitting with somebody, talking about what's wrong, being listened to, being heard, being validated, having somebody, whether they're wearing a white coat or not, look at them and go, so what's going on? They get all of that, and then they get given the medication that goes with it. And we do need to recognise that it's both of those things that is helping people. It's the relationships that they're having. It's the putting it out there. This is how I feel, putting that out there, that is helping, as well as the medication as well. So when you combine those two, the ball starts to roll. I'm getting better, whereas just medication might not be enough for some people, and just therapy might not be enough for some people. We have to look at everything holistically. So many people, like you say, seeing a therapist is going to fix me. They're going to have the magic wand, and they're going to do everything. And I put them on a pedestal, and
that's so damaging, because when it doesn't work, you perceive that as a reflection on yourself. I am so broken that not even this therapist can help me. Yeah.
They come to me saying, you're my last hope. And I'm not. I'm really not. But they genuinely sometimes think that I am. You're my last hope. I've tried everything else. And it's great that they've tried lots of things, but I am not the only therapist in the world. And some of them have only had one or two different type of antidepressant anyway. And we don't know how we need to take so many to figure out what works for us sometimes.
I think mine was, I started taking citalopram and I'm still on it now. The dosage has changed, so I went up from 10 milligrams to 20, but I'm very, very, I know that I'm very lucky, touch wood. I never took anything else. I was prescribed beta blockers, but they didn't really do anything for me, so I didn't take them again.
I don't know much about it being a talk therapist, but clients obviously tell me about them. They're there just to keep your heart slower so that you can handle the driving test, for example.
Yeah.
But obviously what we'd like is that we can feel the fear and do it anyway, as the old phrase goes. But that takes a lot of practice. It really, really does.
It does, and it takes an investment in time and money that most people are not allowed to take. You know, if I was able to take, when I was ill, if I was able to take 3 months off work and do talking therapy as often as I needed to, and I could get yoga classes or have my exercise and my diet subsidized financially, would I have needed to take the medication? I don't know. But that just wasn't an option for me at the time. You don't have the option to take a 6-week break from life to attend to your mental health.
Writing a book containing lots of negative things, lots of negative stories, did you find you had to be in a good place to be able to do that yourself? Or could you be in a bad place, but actually it could be quite cathartic?
I did write when I was ill. I wrote, and it was very, very cathartic. I wrote a short film because I would wake up between. I watched a film called Tyrannosaur by Paddy Considine, which is a brilliant, brilliant film, but not necessarily one that I'd recommend watching when you're severely depressed. You might as well watch it in a triple bill with Requiem for a Dream and The Selfish Giant. It's very, very depressing, but brilliant. And there was a DVD extra, and it was an interview with Paddy Considine where he said that he'd written a short film first, and something flickered in my brain. I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't think that I could write a full-length film, but I thought I might be able to write a short one. And it turns out I couldn't. It's really, really hard. So my brain would wake me up between 3:30 and 5:30, and I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. And my options were to lie there and think about all the terrible things that could befall my family and friends, or I could get up and write. And that's what I did. In the book, I've written down pretty much verbatim a conversation that I had with my mum at that time. I'd say it's a conversation. It's actually more like it's my mum monologuing to me over the phone as I cry and try and breathe. And my mum is just sort of jollying me along, and just what she's saying is, your dad's just painting the garage doors a lovely shade of aubergine. And there's a lovely little birdie outside. Have you put any seeds out for your birdies? They won't come if you don't put the seeds out. They love the fat balls. They do. Those are the words that she's saying.
She sounds amazing.
It's in the book, actually. I would write down the words that she was saying, but what she was actually saying, what she was communicating was, I'm here. I'm here and I'm with you. While I was crying and struggling to breathe and breaking down and feeling dreadful, every day when I was ill, I would ring my parents and they would just be on the other side of the phone. And later that night, when I was awake at 3:30 in the morning or whatever, I would write down those conversations, or I would write something else, or I would write something. A lot of that is gibberish, but it gave me something to focus on, and it gave me something to do. And I think the act of writing is inherently cathartic, not because of the content, not because you're writing something that's particularly interesting or inspiring. A lot of the time it's going to be gibberish, but it just externalizes those thoughts. It almost takes them out of your brain. And this is a very unfashionable analogy at the moment, but it's like when it's in Harry Potter when Dumbledore uses the pensieve, and he can put a pen to his mind and just pull those thoughts out and look at them objectively. It's a really useful cathartic tool. What it isn't is, or what it doesn't need to be, is a job. None of that writing has to be useful. That writing is that kind of writing, that kind of cathartic writing is very different from sitting down and going, right, I need to write a book proposal. What's going to be in chapters 1, 2, and 3? So while bits of that writing, like the conversation with my mum, like those little snippets, you can look back on and go, that's useful, and that's something that I want to show to people, so I'm going to put that in the book. It's not the same as the structured, I'm going to write this and then that and then that. I've forgotten your question. Something to do with cathartic. Yes, do I need to be in a good place to write? Yes and no. No, because it was my job. So what happens is you write a book proposal, you submit it to your publishers, and then they say, yes, we're going to publish it. And then they go, here's the contract. For me, the space between writing the 30,000 word proposal and then the contract being signed was the best part of a year. And in that year, I didn't do any work because I'm an idiot. And then they said, okay, here's the book deal. You've got 3 months. Can you get us a manuscript in 3 months? And I went, yeah, of course. And that happened in what also happened to be my first week of my first proper job. So after I quit at the comedy company, I worked at cafes and pubs quite low impact hourly wage stuff that wasn't taxing for me. It didn't stress me out, and it also gave me time to write. But so then I got my first proper job as a copywriter in an advertising agency. And in that first week of my first proper job, I also got a book deal, and I had 3 months to write. And that meant I had to write a book around a full-time job. So I would wake up in the morning at about 6 o'clock, do a couple of hours before going to work, and then do another couple of hours before coming home. And I would write at weekends. When it's your job and when you have to be that laser focused, I didn't really have time to worry about the content, and I didn't have time to think twice. And I didn't have time to worry about the content. So if something was painful, I just wrote through it because there's an end goal, which was really useful. And I think the book has a sense of urgency because of that. I think it's just, you just go through. It's just bleh. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a good place or a bad place mentally. The book needs to get written, so you write the book.
One of the things that crops up in every self-help book, including my own, is the value of keeping a journal, of getting your thoughts onto paper. And we still find, even in the modern age, that putting pen to paper, the physical act of using your hands to write it, that's my handwriting.
Yes.
Still, even in the younger generation, still has a more powerful effect than typing it somewhere.
And actually, there's an illustrator called Linda Barry who did kind of a TED talk about the link between the decline in cursive handwriting, because kids today aren't taught how to do double writing, and how that has a measurable impact on their emotional well-being, because there isn't that connection between the brain and the eye and the hand.
Oh my God.
It's interesting stuff. But yeah, the physical act of getting a pen in your hand and making marks on the paper, that's really cathartic.
A lot of the time people don't know what to write, and they just sit there with a blank piece of paper. And that's those rare occasions when, as a therapist, we do sometimes give advice. I know people will say that therapists are never there to give advice. Yeah, we are. There are times we do. We're not just there to listen. We're not just there to create rapport and help them feel like a human being. We're also there if somebody drinks 12 cups of coffee a day and they say they're struggling to sleep, to say, have you tried cutting down on the coffee? I think maybe you could do with doing that. We do offer advice from time to time. And one of those might be to sit in front of a A4 notepad, nice one that you can feel, a decent enough pen that you can write with, and just start with, today I feel. And then just see what happens. Just see how you can fill that page. And often people do, they might just say, today I feel shit, and that's it. But sometimes they go, today I feel alone. Today I feel disappointed. Today I feel rejected. Today I feel belittled. Today I felt that my boss Paul, blah, 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 blah. And they've filled a page of it and they go, okay, I get it. And it's out of their head. And rightly or wrongly, some of my colleagues do say, you shouldn't be doing that, Richard. You haven't got time for that. But I do say to all of my one-to-one clients, feel free to message me in between your sessions. I can't guarantee I'm going to reply to everything you send, but I will read everything that you send me, because it gives them somewhere. And that's just typing it in, just texting into their phone. It's better than nothing, but it is so much better when somebody does put pen to paper and actually starts writing. Even if they just shred it because they don't want anybody to see it, but getting it out and reading it back and realizing the meaning behind it all can be very, very, very useful. Often then it helps us to see just what's going on inside our head, because we live there, we've got nowhere else to be, but we don't embrace that in our society too much. We don't talk about some of the problems we have. We don't talk about intrusive thoughts. And yet whenever I make a podcast episode talking about crazy thoughts, intrusive thoughts, I get messages, so many messages from people to go, oh my God, I didn't realize everybody else was the same. I didn't realize everybody else had crazy thoughts. So you think about stabbing people as well? Well, Actually, it turns out lots of people think about stabbing people. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. And it doesn't mean they're a bad person for having that thought. They're just a human with a brain with thoughts. But thoughts are not instructions. Emotions are not instructions. That's a phrase I use quite a lot with my clients. You might feel something. He's not telling you to do something. He's not telling you to do it. It's just a feeling. Emotions are not instructions. And one of the things that you disclosed, which I think the public probably could do with recognizing, oh, wow, I'm not as crazy as I thought I was, is how normal it is to hallucinate, to hear things. The Wind Cries Mary, famous song, all about the fact that when somebody's on your mind, you hear their name everywhere you go. When somebody dies and they're on your mind, you see them. Your brain hallucinates that person. They're there. You genuinely see them across the street. You'll hear their voice, and it's just the creak of a door. You'll hear your name in that creak of a door, them calling you. That's what happens to a human brain. And in times of stress, that ability to hallucinate does get ramped up a little bit. And I'm glad you disclosed that, but that must have been quite scary at the time, not realizing what was going on.
So I was writing the book in Bristol Central Library, and I had my headphones on, and I was really focused. I was in that state where you're just in the flow state, and I was just writing, and it felt great. And I heard a man's voice in my ear, in my left ear, making a threat that I'm not going to repeat. And I jumped out of my seat and I pulled my headphones off, and I think I shouted, "What the fuck was that?" And people around me looked up, and they were, it's a library, it's a quiet place, and this woman's just jumped up and screamed and gone, what was that? And of course, they weren't there. Nothing had happened. And I gathered my things and I left, and I cried all the way home. And I was terrified. I was terrified that it was a sign of a deterioration in my mental health, that it was a new diagnosis, really ugly, frightening diagnoses kind of flitted through my head, like schizophrenia and like psychosis and things that, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not. I don't want to denigrate the people who suffer from those conditions, but the thought that was creeping into my life was terrifying. It was honestly one of the most frightening things that's ever happened. And I contacted various crisis centres, and I contacted a friend who is a clinical psychiatrist, and I said, "This has just happened." And she said, "Okay, all right, that's fine. It's nothing to worry about. It's just a thing that your brain has done. It is just part of the normal phenomenology of your brain." And she said it was framed as to say, I knew it was something that was out. Basically, I knew it wasn't real. I knew that this voice didn't belong to a real person, or there wasn't anything. So I knew that it wasn't real. And that was something that was what she said. Okay, then you're fine. That's just a thing that your brain has done. And again, I understand that I might not be using the, I don't want to say approved language or the semantics when we're talking about these things, because I understand that it is a very, very sensitive issue, and I don't want to, I may misspeak, and I apologize for that. But it was a really frightening, it was terrifying. And that was the only thing in the book that I thought, oh, do I want to put that in?
I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
I'm glad you did, because all the studies into auditory hallucinations have shown that you don't have to have psychosis to experience them. that it's actually quite a normal thing. It happens to a lot of people. Something like, I think at the last study, I think it was 4% of people, whether or not they'd ever had any history or of sort of psychosis or schizophrenia, they would hear those voices. And the thing is, like you say, they know that wasn't real. That was just a voice in my head. And I forget the last time that happened to me. Fairly recently, within the last couple of weeks, I think there was something. And I just ignore it when it happens, because it doesn't bother me, because I know that the brain can fart like that sometimes, and that it is just what it is. We get tactile hallucinations. We feel things that aren't there on our skin. We feel clothes that we're not actually wearing, or we can't feel our hat when we are wearing it, or we can't find our glasses, but they're there on our face. Our brain does all these strange things, and of course, and actual optical illusions. Of course, they're quite jokes about. Look at this optical illusion, this picture, it looks like it's moving and it's not. Your brain is stupid. Wow, isn't my brain stupid? It sees things that aren't there. Yeah, it does. It hears things that aren't there. It feels things that aren't there. It smells and tastes things that aren't there. We can trick it and confuse it. And we need to know that our brain is that stupid and that it's okay if it farts. So I'm glad you disclosed all of that. That was a useful thing.
Good. Thank you.
One of the things that I'm sure it was in the book, so I read it a long time ago when it first came out, that people's experiences, I think it was about trauma. You were talking about trauma and about musical notes. I think there are 7 musical notes, and there are some sharps and flats. There's 12 musical notes, and you can only ever play those notes, but you play them in a bizarre order, you get a song. But those notes have all been played before. And when it comes to things like trauma and difficult experiences, and even anxiety and depression and all the things that influence us, there will be somebody somewhere that has gone through the exact same song. There will be somebody that has exactly the same experiences. And as a human, they were able to get through it. They had that experience, they got through it, and they didn't end their life. They were able to get through it. Did that help you, knowing other people have got through this, so can I? Was that hopeful? Or was there some element of other people can get through this and I can't? There must be something broken about me.
No, for me, it really helped that knowing that other people had survived and come through what felt to me at the time to be insurmountable. For me, it was helpful to know that there's no reinventing the wheel when it comes to human trauma. And that's why the analogy of there are only 12 musical notes. There are only 7 stories. There's a limit to the different types of pain. No matter how debilitating or painful or profound your trauma is, there is someone, it has been met and dealt with by someone. And yes, there are people who didn't feel that they could bear the burden that you're living with. But historically, there are many, many, many people who have survived and thrived. So that's something that was really useful for me. In particular, like we say, it kind of predated the big cultural conversation that we're having about mental illness at the moment. But something that really helped me was Stephen Fry's documentary. I think it was called My Manic Depression and Me, where he interviewed lots of different people about their experience. And that really, really helped. Just seeing people being ill or having been ill and surviving and managing and, just being in their kitchens, having a cup of tea with Stephen Fry. That was really, really inspiring is such an insipid word now. I don't think it really means anything. Hopeful, yeah.
I see that.
And wholesome.
Yeah, I see it through social media, and I know that social media can be an absolute rat's nest of horror. It really can be awful. the potential to be re-traumatized is huge. The potential for other people to be cruel is easy. It's effortless to be cruel to somebody on Twitter, particularly. It's just tap, done, sent. But you can find a tribe as well. There are people that are sharing their stories. They're telling their stories that says, I'm an abuse survivor, or I'm a trauma survivor. I am a bipolar disorder survivor. And they'll talk about their stories, and they'll admit, I'm having a bad day today, and I'm really struggling. And yeah, there might be some dickheads who just rip them apart, and people have to learn to deal with that. But then there are others that say, I understand, and I'm with you. What's going on? And I go, I'm really gutted. I haven't self-harmed in a year, and I've just had to cut myself. I just felt there was no other way. But they've got an outlet without having to pay for therapy, without having to do something else. There are people there to hear their story and say, yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame that happened, but I get it. Been there. If you were doing something every week for 5 years and now you haven't done it for a year, that's a success, mate. Well done. You're doing well. You might not feel it right now, but you're doing well. You've got this. And social media can play a positive role in people's mental health recovery too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's the thing with social media is that you can the real power is that you can curate your own feed. It's a really powerful tool for self-education. You know, you can follow the Guggenheim Museum on Instagram. You can tour the MoMA. You can see people in the remotest corners of the world. It's an incredible tool for developing empathy and curiosity and understanding about other people. And yes, the flip side of that is that it's a tool for really targeted sniper attacks on people's psyche. But I do think, on the whole, yeah, it's a tool for good, I think. And I'm not on TikTok, but I see the kids on TikTok and who are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She does Instagram lives while she's cooking her dinner, and she's talking her followers through really impactful constitutional facts and ways to bring about change. That's an incredible thing. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. That's a miracle. That is a gift. And it is being used wisely. And people do, people think that, millennials, or, we're all too old now, but, they might slag us off for posting too many selfies or liking too many pictures of different foodstuffs. But that's not all there is to it. It is a profound tool for change.
It really, really is. And if anybody wants to find you on social media.
Nice segue. Yes, I'm on Instagram at Ms. M. Thomas, and I'm on Twitter at Michelle Thomas.
Excellent.
And the book is, and the book and the podcast are called My Shit Therapist.
Yep. I shall put some links into the show notes so everybody can find you, can follow you, can read you. What's next?
Honestly, I'm trying to find a bit more work-life balance. So I've got a job where I work 4 days a week. So like yourself, I've got Fridays to do creative work. And so at the moment I'm doing the podcast, that I'm going to focus on that. And then I'm going to propose book 2. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but do keep an eye because I think it's going to be good.
But it's all about writing. That's your thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm good at.
Play to your strengths. Play to your strengths. Michelle, absolutely amazing having you on the podcast series.
Yeah, really nice to chat to you, Richard.
You take care.
You too.
Michelle is ace. And if you want to read her book, listen to her podcast, or follow on that horrible old rat's nest that is social media, then the links are in the show notes, where you can also follow me on that horrible old rat's nest as well. I shouldn't say that. Like we were saying in the episode, yep, people can be vile, and the barriers that social media create can make a toxic environment. So follow the nice ones, like us, and you'll see far more nice stuff than anything else. Right, that's me done for the day. Have a great couple of weeks, and I'll be back soon. Take care, you beauties. Bye!